Tell me the truth, Emily whispered. Did they warn you that your new bride is barren? The words barely survived the enormous bedchamber, but Alexander Blackwood heard them. Of course he did. The Alpha King stood several feet away beneath the silver glow spilling through the tall windows, still dressed in the dark ceremonial coat he had worn when an entire kingdom watched Emily become his wife. She kept one hand against the cold glass behind her, as if the window were the only solid thing left in a world that had changed too quickly. 3 hours ago, she had belonged to Silver Creek. 2 hours ago, she had spoken vows before strangers. Now she stood alone with the most feared werewolf king in the Northern Territories, carrying the secret everyone back home had treated like a sentence. Alexander did not move closer. That unsettled her more than anger would have. His gray eyes rested on her face, calm and unreadable. They told me, he said. Emily swallowed. Then you know I can't give you what a queen is supposed to give you. Silence settled between them. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, a clock struck midnight. Emily lowered her eyes before he could see how deeply those words hurt. Barren, defective, worthless. She had heard them so often that sometimes they sounded like her own thoughts. Look at me, Emily. His voice was quiet, not commanding. Somehow, that made her obey. Alexander had stopped at least 6 feet away. He seemed almost careful with the distance between them. Who taught you that marriage is measured by what you can produce? He asked. Her breath caught. Everyone. Something changed behind his eyes. Not pity. She knew pity too well. This looked colder, sharper, directed somewhere far beyond her. Then everyone failed you. Emily stared at him. She had prepared herself for disappointment, obligation, perhaps a polite arrangement in which the king endured the bride his treaty had delivered. She had not prepared herself for kindness. Alexander slowly removed his ceremonial gloves and placed them on the table, making no attempt to approach her. You're frightened, he said. Emily almost denied it. Instead, she nodded. A little. Then nothing. Happens tonight that you do not choose. Her fingers loosened against the glass. Alexander's expression softened by the smallest degree. They filled your head with stories about alpha kings, marriage bonds, and what a werewolf husband expects from his bride. Emily felt warmth rise into her face, but his tone remained gentle, almost solemn. I'll show you how werewolves love, he murmured. It begins with trust. Nothing more. For one suspended heartbeat, Emily forgot how to breathe. She had entered Blackwood Castle expecting to become someone's obligation. Yet the king was standing across the room, giving her something Silver Creek had rarely offered her. A choice. And 3 days earlier, when the elders of her pack had decided she was the easiest woman to sacrifice, Emily Carter could never have imagined that the man she had been taught to fear would be the first person to ask what she wanted. 3 days earlier, Emily Carter had been standing ankle-deep in autumn leaves when she heard 2 women behind her whisper the word they thought she could no longer hear. Barren. Neither woman bothered lowering her voice very much. Why would they? In Silver Creek, Emily's humiliation had stopped being private almost 2 years ago. She continued carrying a basket of clean blankets toward the small infirmary at the edge of the village, pretending the word had disappeared beneath the rustle of maple branches overhead. The afternoon smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Children raced between weathered cottages while families stacked firewood against their porches for the coming winter. Emily knew almost every person she passed. She knew which elderly man needed extra blankets when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees, which little girl hated bitter medicine, and which widowed mother quietly skipped meals so her sons could eat. She remembered things because being useful had become easier than asking whether anyone remembered her. Miss Emily, a small voice called from beside the infirmary steps. 8-year-old Noah Bennett hurried toward her with one untied shoelace and a knitted cap slipping over his eyes. Grandma says you forgot your lunch again. He held up a paper-wrapped sandwich with both hands. Emily stopped. Something inside her softened. Your grandmother worries too much. She says you worry about everybody except yourself. Your grandmother talks too much. Noah grinned. Emily accepted the sandwich, then crouched and tied his loose shoe. Behind them, 2 pack women walked past. Their conversation stopped when they noticed her. Emily felt their eyes linger. Once, those same women had spoken excitedly about her future mating ceremony. Back then, Emily had been 22, healthy, quiet, and expected to marry Daniel Mercer, the son of a respected Silver Creek family. Then the pack healer had examined her after months of unexplained weakness and delivered a conclusion that traveled through the village faster than any official announcement. Emily would never bear children. Daniel ended their engagement 11 days later. His mother returned Emily's wedding gifts in a wooden crate left outside her door. After that, invitations disappeared. Conversations changed when she entered rooms. No one openly banished her. Silver Creek had discovered something more elegant than exile. They simply made her feel unnecessary. Emily rose and brushed a leaf from her skirt. "Go home before your grandmother sends half the village looking for you." Noah ran off laughing. She watched until he disappeared around the corner, then entered the infirmary. Mrs. Bennet sat beside the stove folding bandages. The older woman's smile vanished when Emily stepped inside. "What happened?" Emily asked. Mrs. Bennet looked toward the window. Outside, men were gathering near the council hall. "A royal messenger arrived 20 minutes ago." Emily set down the blankets. Royal messengers did not visit Silver Creek. Their pack was too small, too poor, and too far from anything important. "From where?" Mrs. Bennet hesitated. "Blackwood." The room suddenly seemed colder. Emily had heard that name since childhood. Every wolf in the Northern Territories had. Blackwood was not merely another pack. It was the kingdom that stood above them all. And its ruler was Alexander Blackwood. Emily glanced outside again. Pack elders hurried across the square while families appeared in doorways, watching in uneasy silence. At the center stood a stranger in a charcoal coat bearing the silver wolf crest of the royal house. He carried a sealed document. Emily could not explain why her heartbeat changed when she saw it. Then the bell above the council hall began ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. An emergency assembly. Mrs. Bennet slowly reached for Emily's hand. "Whatever they want," she whispered. "I do not think they came here by accident." Emily looked toward the gathering crowd and felt an old instinct tell her to remain invisible. But across the square, Elder Thomas Reed stepped from the council hall and searched the villagers until his eyes found hers. He did not look relieved to see her. He looked guilty. By the time Emily reached the council hall, nearly every adult in Silver Creek had gathered beneath its timber roof. The room smelled of wet coats, pine smoke, and nervous sweat. No one spoke above a murmur. At the far end, Elder Thomas Reed stood beside the royal messenger, whose charcoal coat looked almost black beneath the hanging lanterns. Emily slipped into the back row, hoping Thomas had looked at someone else. Then his gaze found her again. The guilt was still there. The messenger broke the wax seal on the document in his hands. By order of the Blackwood Crown, Silver Creek is required to settle the obligations recorded under the Northern Protection Accord. A restless sound moved through the room. Emily knew about the debt. Everyone did. 2 failed harvests had emptied their storehouses. An early freeze had ruined much of the remaining crop, and repairs after the spring floods had consumed money the pack did not have. Blackwood had supplied grain, medicine, and lumber. Without that aid, Silver Creek might not have survived the previous winter. "The amount cannot be paid," Thomas admitted. A man near the front stood abruptly. "Then give us another year." "We requested one." Thomas looked older than he had that morning. The request was denied. Fear traveled through the crowd faster than words. Emily saw mothers pull children closer. She thought of Noah carrying her sandwich, of Mrs. Bennet counting medicine bottles, of cottages with barely enough firewood stacked outside. The messenger waited until the room quieted. "The Crown has offered an alternative settlement." That should have brought relief. It did not. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "King Alexander Blackwood will enter a royal marriage under the terms of the accord. If Silver Creek provides an eligible Omega bride, the financial debt will be forgiven, winter provisions will continue, and this territory will remain under Silver Creek governance." Silence. Complete and immediate. Emily heard the faint crackle of the fireplace. Then someone whispered, "A bride?" Several families exchanged alarmed looks. The unmarried Omega women stood beside parents who suddenly seemed determined not to meet the elders' eyes. One father stepped forward. "My daughter is 17. She is excluded," Thomas said quickly. Another woman shook her head. "Grace is promised to another pack." Excuses followed. Some reasonable, some desperate. Each one carried the same meaning. Someone must go, but not mine. Emily felt the shape of the moment before anyone spoke her name. Perhaps she had learned to recognize that particular silence. The silence people created when cruelty needed permission. Councilman Robert Hale leaned toward Thomas and whispered something. Thomas stiffened. No, Robert did not lower his voice the second time. We have an unmarried omega of age with no existing bond. Heads began turning. One by one. Emily stood perfectly still. Robert finally looked directly at her. Emily Carter. Mrs. Bennet made a wounded sound beside her. Absolutely not. Robert continued as though she had said nothing. She has no engagement, no dependent children, and no family claim preventing relocation. Every qualification sounded carefully selected to erase the person standing beneath them. Emily's palms grew cold. Then a woman near the front spoke softly. But the king will need an heir. Emily knew that voice. Daniel Mercer's mother. For a moment, she was 22 again, staring at a wooden crate filled with returned wedding gifts. Robert's expression tightened. The medical record is known. Perhaps that makes her unsuitable. Hope flickered inside Emily, small and humiliating. Then another elder spoke from behind the council table. Or it makes her the least costly choice. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Emily looked around the hall at neighbors she had cared for, children she had taught, families whose doors had once opened freely to her. Most could not meet her eyes. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, carrying the first warning of winter. The royal messenger folded his hands behind his back. The crown requires an answer before sunset. Emily looked at the clock above the fireplace. They had less than 2 hours. Then Thomas stepped toward her, his face pale with shame. Emily, he said quietly, you do not have to save us. But across the room, surrounded by frightened families and empty promises, Emily understood the terrible truth. Everyone was waiting to see whether she would. Emily watched the minute hand crawl across the clock, and for the first time in years, Silver Creek seemed afraid of her silence. Nobody demanded an answer. Nobody needed to. Their frightened faces filled the council hall, each one carrying a reason she should sacrifice herself so they would not have to sacrifice anything. Emily looked toward Noah, standing near the doorway beside his grandmother. He was too young to understand royal debts, but he understood fear. His small hand was wrapped around Mrs. Bennet's fingers. Emily imagined winter arriving without Blackwood grain, medicine, or heating supplies. She imagined the infirmary shelves empty. That thought hurt more than Robert Hale's words ever could. What exactly happens if I agree? Emily asked. The royal messenger studied her with unexpected respect. The crown forgives Silver Creek's outstanding debt. Supply deliveries continue through winter. Your territory remains under its present leadership. And if I refuse? Thomas stepped forward. Emily, you do not need to ask that. She looked at him. I asked him. The messenger hesitated. The original repayment schedule resumes immediately. A quiet breath passed through the room. Everyone knew what that meant. Silver Creek could not pay. Emily folded her hands so nobody would see them trembling. When would I leave? Tonight. Mrs. Bennet turned sharply. Tonight. The royal convoy departs at 8. Emily glanced toward the windows. The daylight was already fading behind the pines. Less than 3 hours to pack away 24 years of life. Less than 3 hours to become the bride of a man she had never met. She expected panic. Instead, an eerie calm settled over her. Perhaps there came a point when fear became too large to carry, and the body simply put it down. Robert Hale cleared his throat. The council appreciates your cooperation. Emily turned toward him. I have not agreed yet. His mouth closed. For once, nobody in the room looked through her. Emily walked to the council table and stopped before the royal document. I want 3 conditions. The messenger raised an eyebrow. Thomas almost smiled. Name them. The infirmary receives medicine before the first freeze. Every household receives enough food and heating supplies for winter. And no family loses its home because of this debt. Robert started to object, but the messenger lifted one hand. Those terms can be added. Emily picked up the pen. Its weight felt strangely heavy. Daniel's mother stared at her from across the room, and Emily remembered every conversation that had stopped when she entered, every invitation that never came, every sympathetic smile that had made her feel smaller. They had decided she could never build a family. Now they were asking her to preserve theirs. She signed her name. The scratch of the pen sounded louder than the storm beginning outside. Mrs. Bennet covered her mouth. Thomas lowered his head. The messenger pressed the royal seal beneath Emily's signature. The agreement is accepted. Emily released the pen. Then make sure Silver Creek receives what was promised. You have my word. She turned toward the doors. The crowd separated without being asked. People who had ignored her for years suddenly watched her, as though they were seeing her clearly for the first time. Emily had almost reached the exit when Robert called after her. You should be honored. Few Omegas ever enter Blackwood Castle. Emily stopped, but did not turn around. You did not choose me because you thought I deserved honor. The room went silent. You chose me because you thought losing me would cost the least. Then she walked outside into the cold evening, where the first snow of the season had begun to fall, and wondered whether somewhere beyond those dark mountains King Alexander Blackwood already knew what Silver Creek had just traded for its survival. The royal convoy arrived at the edge of Silver Creek just before 8. 6 black vehicles moving through the snowfall with their headlights glowing between the pines. Emily stood beneath the porch light of her small cottage with one suitcase beside her and her winter coat buttoned to her throat. 24 years had fit into a single piece of luggage. The thought should have made her sad. Instead, it made her realize how little of Silver Creek had ever truly belonged to her. Mrs. Bennet stood beside her holding a paper bag filled with sandwiches, apples, and cookies as though Emily were leaving for college instead of an uncertain marriage. Noah had fallen asleep against his grandmother's side while waiting. You do not have to pretend you are not scared, Mrs. Bennet said softly. Emily looked toward the approaching headlights. If I admit how scared I am, I might not get in the car. Mrs. Bennet reached for her hand. Then be scared and go anyway. Emily managed a small smile. Behind them, the village remained unusually quiet. A few families had gathered near their porches, but most kept their distance. Thomas Reed appeared carrying a garment bag. This came from the council storage, he said. It belonged to your mother. Emily froze. She had not seen the dress since she was a child. Her mother had worn it to a winter ceremony years before illness took her. Why was the council keeping it? Your father placed several family belongings in storage before he died. Thomas looked ashamed. I should have returned them sooner. Emily took the garment bag without answering. Tonight seemed determined to return things only when she no longer needed them. A royal attendant approached from the first vehicle. Miss Carter, Emily nodded. I am Margaret Ellis. I will accompany you to Blackwood. Margaret was perhaps 50, silver threaded through her dark hair, her manner formal but not unfriendly. She took Emily's suitcase, then noticed the garment bag. Your wedding dress? Apparently. Margaret gave her a curious look. The ceremony is tomorrow evening. Emily blinked. Tomorrow. His Majesty requested enough time for you to rest after the journey. That surprised her. Everything she had heard about Alexander Blackwood described a man who expected immediate obedience. How far is the castle? About 4 hours in good weather. Tonight, perhaps 5. Emily looked back at Silver Creek. Noah stirred awake and hurried toward her. Miss Emily. She crouched as he wrapped his arms around her. Are you coming back? The question nearly broke the calm she had worked so hard to maintain. I hope so. Noah pulled something from his pocket, a tiny wooden wolf carved unevenly from pine. For when you get lonely. Emily closed her fingers around it. I will keep it safe. When she finally entered the vehicle, Mrs. Bennet stood beneath the porch light until the snowfall blurred her into a shadow. The convoy moved north. Silver Creek disappeared behind dark trees, then behind miles of white road. Emily rested the wooden wolf in her palm, while Margaret quietly reviewed the schedule for the following day. There would be breakfast, a meeting with the royal household, preparation for the ceremony, and finally an audience with the king. What is he really like? Emily asked. Margaret became still. King Alexander? People tell stories. People always do. Are they true? Margaret looked through the window for several seconds. His Majesty can be difficult to understand. He speaks little. He notices everything. And he has very little patience for dishonesty. Emily absorbed that. Does he know about me? Margaret turned toward her. He read your file personally. Emily's stomach tightened. Then he knows what the healer said. Yes. And he still agreed? Margaret's expression changed, almost as if she had been waiting for that question. Miss Carter, there is something you should understand before we arrive. The council sent His Majesty profiles of 4 eligible women from different territories. Emily stared at her. 4. Yes. Snow streaked across the dark window as the vehicle climbed higher into the mountains. The king rejected the other three. Emily's fingers tightened around the little wooden wolf. Why? Margaret looked directly into her eyes. He chose you. Emily stared at Margaret as the words settled between them. He chose you. Outside the window, Silver Creek had vanished completely, replaced by miles of snow-covered forest and narrow mountain roads shining beneath the headlights. That does not make sense, Emily said. Margaret folded her hands over her coat. Kings are not required to explain every decision. Maybe not to you. Emily looked down at the wooden wolf in her palm. But I am supposed to marry him tomorrow. Margaret's expression softened. Then perhaps you should ask him yourself. The convoy continued north, climbing steadily until the trees grew taller and the snow deeper. Emily tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, questions crowded in. For women, Alexander could have chosen someone wealthy, respected, someone whose family name strengthened the throne. Instead, he had selected an Omega from a struggling pack whose medical record carried the one condition royal families usually feared most. Near midnight, Margaret pointed through the windshield. Blackwood territory. Emily leaned forward. Stone markers stood beside the road, each carved with a silver wolf beneath a crescent moon. Beyond them, warm lights appeared between the trees. She had expected something severe, perhaps villages living beneath the shadow of a feared ruler. Instead, she saw tidy homes with glowing windows, a late-night diner beside a gas station, and workers clearing snow from the sidewalks. A small clinic remained open despite the hour. The king funds winter shelters in every northern district, Margaret said, noticing Emily's attention. No household here loses heat because it cannot pay. Emily looked at her. That detail did not belong in any story she had heard about Alexander Blackwood. 20 minutes later, the forest opened, and Blackwood Castle appeared. Above the valley, Emily forgot every question. The enormous stone residence rose from the mountain like something preserved from another century, its towers outlined against the snowy sky, hundreds of windows glowing gold. Yet the road leading toward it was modern, wide, and carefully maintained. Guards opened the iron gates before the convoy slowed. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Is he waiting? Probably not, Margaret said. His Majesty was in council when we left. Relief came too quickly. Emily was not ready to meet him. The vehicle stopped beneath a covered entrance. Before Margaret could reach for the door, it opened from outside. A tall man in a dark overcoat stood beneath the lights. Snow rested across his broad shoulders and dark hair. He had no crown, no ceremonial clothing, nothing Emily expected from royalty. But every guard nearby had gone perfectly still. Margaret immediately lowered her head. Your Majesty. Emily's breath stopped. Alexander Blackwood looked nothing like the monster Silver Creek had built from rumors. He looked tired, controlled, human. Then his gray eyes met hers. Something changed. His entire body became motionless, as if he had heard a sound no one else could hear. Emily felt something answer inside her, faint and unfamiliar, a warmth beneath her ribs where there had been silence for years. Alexander took one step toward the vehicle, then deliberately stopped himself. His gaze moved over her face with an intensity that made Emily forget the cold. Emily Carter, he said quietly. It was not a question. She stepped onto the stone pavement. Your Majesty. Alexander. She blinked. Excuse me. You are marrying me tomorrow. I think Alexander will do. Margaret hid what looked suspiciously like a smile. Emily tightened her fingers around the wooden wolf. Then you should call me Emily. His eyes dropped briefly to the little carving in her hand, and for one strange second, the king's guarded expression softened. Welcome to Blackwood, Emily. She expected servants to take her away. Instead, Alexander turned toward the doors and waited for her to walk beside him. Emily followed, painfully aware of the quiet guards watching them. They had crossed only a few yards when a silver-haired man hurried from inside, carrying a leather medical case. Your Majesty, before the bride enters the royal residence, protocol requires an examination. Emily stopped. Alexander did too. The warmth vanished from his expression. No, the physician looked startled. But the succession council specifically requested confirmation of her condition. Emily felt the old shame return instantly. Alexander turned his head toward the man. His voice remained calm. No physician examines my future wife unless she requests it herself, and no council discusses her body as though it belongs to the crown. Silence filled the entrance. Then Alexander looked at Emily, not the physician. Your choice. 2 words. Nothing more. Yet standing beneath the lights of Blackwood Castle, Emily realized that the man everyone had taught her to fear had just given her something her own pack never had. Emily looked at the physician, then at Alexander. Not tonight, she said. The answer came more steadily than she expected. Alexander gave a single nod. Then not tonight. The silver-haired physician closed his medical case, but irritation tightened his mouth. The succession council will object. They are welcome to object tomorrow. Alexander turned toward the doors. Tonight, she rests. Emily followed him into Blackwood Castle, where warmth replaced the mountain cold almost instantly. The entrance hall rose 3 stories above polished stone floors, illuminated by amber chandeliers, and a fireplace large enough for Emily to stand inside. She expected servants to stare at the unwanted Omega chosen by their king. Instead, they greeted her by name. Someone took her coat. Another attendant offered hot tea. No one whispered. No one looked at her with pity. That almost made her more uneasy. Alexander walked beside her through a long corridor lined with old paintings. You read my file, Emily said. His steps slowed. Yes. All of it. Everything they sent. She stopped beneath a portrait of a woman wearing a silver crown. Then why did you choose me? Alexander turned. For several seconds, only the fire behind them made a sound. You want the diplomatic answer or the truth? The truth. Something almost amused crossed his face. Good. He moved closer, but left several feet between them. The other candidates were presented like business proposals. Family influence. Land. Political alliances. Their files told me what their packs wanted from Blackwood. And mine. Yours told me what Silver Creek thought it could afford to lose. Emily felt the words land somewhere deep. That still does not explain why you chose me. No, Alexander said. It does not. Before she could press him, footsteps approached. 3 officials entered from an adjoining hall. The woman leading them wore a navy suit and a silver moon pin. Your Majesty, we need 5 minutes. Alexander's expression hardened. Tomorrow. The wedding is tomorrow. That is precisely the problem. Her gaze moved to Emily. Miss Carter, I am Evelyn Ward, chair of the Succession Council. This is not personal. Emily had learned that sentence usually meant the opposite. Evelyn continued. Blackwood requires continuity. Your medical history creates concerns that cannot simply be ignored. Alexander stepped forward. Emily touched his sleeve. The movement surprised both of them. Let me answer. He became still, then stepped back. Emily faced Evelyn. You are worried I cannot provide an heir. Yes. So am I. The honesty silenced the room. I did not ask for this marriage. I agreed because my people needed food and medicine. If my condition makes me unacceptable, tell me now. I will not spend tomorrow pretending everyone wants me here. Evelyn opened her mouth, but Alexander spoke first. I want you here. Emily turned toward him. His voice had been quiet, yet every official heard it. Alexander, Evelyn warned. The crown is larger than personal preference, which is why I will not build its future on treating a woman like breeding stock. No one answered. Alexander looked directly at Emily. You asked why I chose you. Because every report about you contained the same contradiction. Silver Creek called you useless, yet the infirmary depended on you. They called you a burden, yet you worked more hours than most of their council. They said you had no value, yet when offered freedom from their debt, they chose your life to purchase it. Emily's throat tightened. Alexander's gaze softened. I wanted to meet the woman they worked so hard not to see. For the first time that night, Emily had no answer. Evelyn finally lowered her eyes. We will continue this discussion tomorrow. When the officials left, Alexander escorted Emily toward the guest wing. At her door, he stopped. There is one condition before tomorrow's ceremony. Emily's stomach tightened. What condition? His eyes held hers. Until I understand why parts of your medical file do not match, no royal physician examines you without me present. Emily stared at him. Do not match. Alexander glanced down the empty corridor before lowering his voice. Your diagnosis says one thing, Emily. Your blood work says something else. Emily did not sleep much. Alexander's final words followed her into every quiet corner of the guest suite. Your diagnosis says one thing. Your blood work says something else. By morning, snow had covered the castle grounds in white, and the mountains beyond the windows looked almost unreal beneath the pale winter sun. Margaret arrived shortly after 8 with breakfast and found Emily standing beside the window, still holding the little wooden wolf Noah had given her. "You are thinking too loudly," Margaret said. Emily managed a tired smile. "Is that another werewolf ability?" "No. That is a woman who has lived long enough ability." Emily set the carving on the table. "Alexander thinks something is wrong with my medical records." Margaret's hands paused over the coffee tray. Only for a second, but Emily noticed. "You knew?" "I knew His Majesty requested the original records before approving the marriage." "Why would he do that?" Margaret looked toward the closed door. "That is a question for him." Before Emily could press further, bells sounded somewhere deep inside the castle. The wedding preparations had begun. Hours disappeared beneath fittings, ceremonial instructions, and introductions Emily could barely remember. Shortly before sunset, Margaret unzipped the garment bag Thomas had given her. Emily's mother's dress emerged beneath the warm bedroom lights, ivory fabric simple with age but beautifully preserved. Emily touched the sleeve and remembered small hands clutching that same fabric when her mother lifted her during winter festivals. For the first time since leaving Silver Creek, homesickness reached her. Not for the pack, for the people who were gone. She would have been proud, Margaret said quietly. Emily swallowed. "You never met her?" "No," Margaret adjusted the collar gently. "But I have met you." The ceremony took place after nightfall in the Moon Hall, beneath a glass ceiling that opened the room to the stars. Hundreds of candles lined the stone aisle. Representatives from northern packs filled the seats, while Blackwood officials stood near a circular altar carved from white stone. Emily entered alone. Whispers followed her immediately. She caught fragments. Silver Creek. Omega. Medical condition. She kept walking. Then she saw Alexander waiting at the altar in a black formal coat trimmed with silver. He did not look toward the officials. He looked only at her. The whispers seemed to disappear. When Emily reached him, Alexander offered his hand rather than taking hers. Another choice. She placed her fingers into his palm. Warmth rushed beneath her skin so suddenly that she almost pulled away. Alexander inhaled sharply. His gray eyes flashed silver for a heartbeat. Around them, several wolves became perfectly still. "Alexander," Emily whispered. "I am fine." But his voice had changed, roughened by something he was struggling to control. The officiant began the ancient vows. Emily repeated each line carefully, promising honesty, protection, and loyalty freely given. Alexander answered with the same vows. When the officiant wrapped a silver ceremonial ribbon loosely around their joined hands, heat moved through Emily again. This time it reached deeper, awakening something that had been silent inside her for years. A pulse. A presence. Her wolf. Emily's breath caught. Beneath the ribbon, a faint silver crescent appeared on the inside of her wrist. Alexander saw it. So did the silver-haired physician standing near Evelyn Ward. The man's face lost all color. "What is that?" Emily whispered. Alexander stared at the mark as though it had confirmed something he had feared and hoped for at once. The physician stepped backward. Emily noticed. More importantly, Alexander noticed too. The ceremony continued, but his attention never fully left that man. Minutes later, the officiant declared their vows complete. The hall rose in formal applause. Emily should have felt trapped by the finality of it. Instead, the quiet presence inside her remained awake, warm and impossibly familiar. Alexander leaned closer, keeping his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Whatever they told you was wrong with you, Emily. I think we are about to discover they lied." The applause had barely faded when Alexander felt Emily's fingers tighten around his hand. The silver crescent on her wrist was already growing faint, disappearing beneath her skin as though it had never been there. Emily stared at the place where it had appeared. "You saw that?" "I did." Alexander's answer was calm, but his attention had shifted beyond her shoulder. The silver-haired physician was moving toward a side door. "Too quickly." "Stay with Margaret," Alexander said. Emily turned to him. "Why?" "Because our physician suddenly remembered somewhere else he needs to be." Before Alexander could move, a young attendant approached carrying 2 crystal glasses on a silver tray. "For the royal toast, Your Majesty." Emily reached automatically for one. Alexander caught her wrist before her fingers touched the glass, then immediately loosened his grip. His eyes had fixed on the drink. "Wait." The attendant froze. "Is something wrong?" Emily asked. Alexander lifted the glass toward the candlelight. A faint cloudy ribbon drifted through the pale liquid. Almost invisible, his expression became unreadable. Who prepared this? The reception staff, Your Majesty. I only brought the tray. The attendant looked terrified. Alexander set the glass down without tasting it. Margaret. She appeared beside Emily almost instantly. Take Emily to the west sitting room. No food or drink until I join you. Emily's heartbeat accelerated. Alexander, tell me what is happening. His gaze softened when it returned to her. I do not know yet. Then do not send me away like a child. Something inside Emily had changed during the ceremony. Perhaps it was the strange warmth still lingering beneath her ribs. Perhaps she was simply tired of decisions being made around her. Alexander studied her for one long second, then nodded. Fair. He turned toward a guard. Seal the reception service area. Quietly. Nobody leaves until we know where that glass came from. There was no shouting, no panic. Music continued in the adjoining hall while guests remained unaware that anything had happened. Alexander picked up the untouched glass with a folded napkin and handed it to Margaret. Have the laboratory test it. Emily watched the cloudy thread swirl again. You think someone put something in it? I think guessing would be irresponsible. His restraint frightened her more than certainty would have. A few minutes later, Margaret returned from the corridor, her face tense. The physician is gone. Alexander's jaw tightened. Dr. Franklin left the castle? His coat and car are still here. Security believes he used a staff passage. Emily looked down at her wrist. The crescent was gone now. He saw the mark. Yes, Alexander said. And he recognized it. Evelyn Ward approached, concern replacing her earlier formality. Alexander, the laboratory needs 20 minutes. Give them 10. Emily stepped closer to the abandoned tray. Something near its edge caught the light. A tiny paper seal had stuck beneath the folded linen. She carefully pointed to it without touching. That symbol. Alexander followed her gaze. Printed on the seal was a narrow pine tree enclosed by a circle. Emily knew it immediately. Her stomach dropped. That is Silver Creek's infirmary mark. Silence seemed to close around them. Alexander looked at her. Are you certain? I packed medicine with that seal every week. Margaret returned 10 minutes later carrying a laboratory report. It was not poison, she said quickly. Emily released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Then what was it? Margaret's expression remained troubled. A concentrated herbal suppressant. It temporarily dulls scent. Recognition and wolf response. Emily went still. Those words felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Alexander took the report. How long has this compound existed? Years. Margaret hesitated. Possibly decades. Emily suddenly remembered the bitter medicine she had taken every morning after her diagnosis. The healer had said it was for weakness. She remembered how her wolf had grown quieter afterward. Month by month. Year by year. Alexander saw understanding cross her face. Emily. Her voice came out almost soundless. I know that taste. Across the hall, the clock struck midnight. Alexander looked from the Silver Creek seal to the fading crescent on her wrist. Then whoever sent this was not trying to hurt you tonight. His gray eyes hardened. They were trying to keep something inside you asleep. Emily had not tasted the medicine in almost 48 hours. Yet suddenly, she could remember every morning she had swallowed it. The small brown bottle beside her breakfast. The healer telling her not to miss a dose. The bitterness lingering on her tongue, while something inside her grew quieter year after year. Alexander watched her face carefully. How long did you take it? Almost 2 years. Emily pressed her fingers against the place where the silver crescent had appeared. Dr. Samuel Grant prescribed it after he diagnosed me. He said my body was unstable and the medicine would protect my health. Evelyn Ward looked toward Margaret. Can we obtain the original records? Already requested. Margaret held up her phone. Blackwood Archives received copies when Silver Creek submitted Emily's marriage profile. Alexander turned toward the corridor. Then we stopped guessing. The Royal Archives occupied a quiet wing beneath the main library. Minutes later, Emily sat at a long oak table beneath warm reading lamps while Margaret placed several folders before them. Her name appeared across the first one. Emily Carter. Seeing 24 years reduced to paper made her uncomfortable. Alexander remained beside her rather than taking the chair at the head of the table. Evelyn opened the laboratory summary. The suppressant found tonight matches compounds listed in your prescription history. Emily's stomach tightened. So I really was taking it. Yes, Evelyn said. But that does not explain why. Margaret opened another folder. Here's the problem. She placed two reports side by side. This is Dr. Grant's written diagnosis from 2 years ago. It states that testing confirmed permanent infertility. Emily stared at the sentence she had built her life around. And the other report? The laboratory results from the same week. Margaret tapped the page. They do not confirm that conclusion. Emily looked at Alexander. What does that mean? He let Margaret answer. It means the medical evidence in this file does not establish that you are barren. For several seconds, Emily heard nothing except the soft hum of the heating system. No, her voice trembled. He told me there was no uncertainty. Margaret's expression was gentle. The records say otherwise. Emily stood too quickly and walked toward the shelves. She needed distance from the table, from the papers, from the possibility that 2 years of shame had been built on a sentence someone chose to write. Alexander did not follow immediately. He gave her space. That mattered. Daniel left me because of that diagnosis, she whispered. People stopped inviting me into their homes. The council treated me like I had no future. Her throat tightened. I started believing them. Alexander finally approached, stopping several feet away. Emily, a false record does not tell us why it was created. But someone created it. Yes. Evelyn suddenly turned another page. There is more. Emily faced her. Your prescription was renewed every 3 months, but after the first year, Dr. Grant was no longer signing the authorization. Then who was? Evelyn rotated the document toward her. At the bottom was a familiar signature. Robert Hale. Emily felt the room tilt beneath her. The councilman who had called her the least costly choice had personally authorized the medicine, keeping her wolf suppressed. Alexander's expression became dangerously still, but his voice remained controlled. Margaret, contact Silver Creek. I want Robert Hale and Dr. Grant brought to Blackwood for questioning. Emily returned to the table. Beneath the prescription forms was an older document she had never seen. A childhood bloodline assessment, completed when she was 6 years old. Across the bottom, someone had stamped the page confidential. Margaret read the final line twice before looking up. Alexander. He took the document. His gray eyes narrowed. Emily could not wait. What does it say? Alexander placed the page before her. The report identified a rare maternal lineage associated with unusually strong mate bonds and late wolf awakening. Emily stared at the words until they blurred. My mother knew? Possibly, Alexander said. Then Margaret opened the final envelope. Inside was a handwritten note dated 18 years earlier. Emily recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. Her hands began to shake before she read the first sentence. If anything happens to me, do not let the Silver Creek Council suppress Emily's wolf. Emily stopped breathing. Alexander looked toward the door as footsteps approached rapidly from the corridor. A guard entered carrying a message. Your Majesty, Silver Creek responded. Alexander took the paper. Dr. Grant disappeared yesterday morning. Emily's heart sank. And Robert? The guard hesitated. Councilman Hale left Silver Creek less than 1 hour after Miss Carter signed the marriage agreement. Emily read her mother's warning again, but the words refused to become less impossible. Do not let the Silver Creek Council suppress Emily's wolf. For years, she had believed the silence inside her was proof that something in her had failed. Now that silence had a name. Someone had created it. Alexander dismissed everyone except Margaret, then waited until the archive door closed. There is something else I need to tell you. Emily looked up from the letter. Please do not tell me there is another file. No, his expression changed, losing the guarded authority he wore around his counsel. This is about why I chose you. Emily remembered asking him that question only hours earlier. You said you wanted to meet the woman Silver Creek refused to see. That was true, but not all of it. No, Alexander. Walked toward one of the narrow windows. Snow moved beyond the glass, silver beneath the moonlight. 8 years ago, before I became king, I traveled through Silver Creek territory after a winter summit. I was 24 and convinced I could handle every problem alone. Emily almost smiled. That sounds familiar. I was worse. A faint smile touched his face, then disappeared. A storm separated me from my escort. I shifted so I could travel faster through the forest, but exhaustion caught up with me near a creek about 2 miles outside your village. Something stirred in Emily's memory. A winter evening. Snow falling through bare branches. A dark wolf lying beneath an old cedar tree. She had been 16. No, she whispered. Alexander turned. Emily could see the answer before he spoke. You found me. She stared at him. That wolf was you. You brought water in a metal bowl. You left half your dinner beside the tree. Emily remembered kneeling several feet away because the animal had seemed frightened of people. She remembered talking softly to him about completely ordinary things while waiting for him to drink. I thought you were a stray. You called me stubborn. You would not eat. Because you brought me carrots. Emily laughed before she could stop herself. The sound felt strange after everything that night. Alexander smiled too. Eventually you returned with chicken. I remember. The warmth beneath Emily's ribs stirred again, gentle but unmistakable. Why did you never tell anyone? He asked. There was nothing to tell. I helped an animal in the woods. Alexander studied her. Exactly. Emily's smile faded. What does that mean? You expected nothing. You did not know who I was. You did not even know I could understand you. He stepped closer, still leaving her room to move away. My wolf remembered you. Emily's heartbeat changed. For 8 years. Not your face. Your scent. Your voice. The feeling of being near you. He glanced toward her wrist. When your profile reached Blackwood, there was almost no scent signature attached to it because of the suppressant. But there was enough. Emily suddenly understood why he had requested her. Original medical records. You recognized me. I suspected. And tonight, when you took my hand at the altar, I knew. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Emily looked down at her mother's letter. Then this marriage was never random. No. Did you arrange Silver Creek's debt so they would send me? Alexander's answer came immediately. Never. The firmness in his voice made her believe him. I did not know which pack would answer the marriage accord. When your name appeared, I recognized an opportunity one never expected to have. Emily searched his face. To find your mate? Alexander shook his head. To find you. The bond is not permission to own someone, Emily. You still decide what I become to you. Those words reached somewhere the council's lies had not. Before she could answer, Margaret's phone rang. She listened, then looked sharply toward Alexander. They found Robert Hale. Emily stood. Where? Margaret lowered the phone. At a hotel 12 miles from Blackwood territory. Alexander's expression hardened. Margaret continued. He is asking to speak directly with Emily. Why? Margaret looked at her. Because he says her mother's letter is only half the truth. Robert Hale did not look like a man who had escaped anything. When Emily entered Blackwood's private council chamber the next morning, he was sitting quietly at the far end of the long table with his coat folded beside him and exhaustion carved into his face. Alexander walked beside her, but Emily had insisted on taking the chair at the center herself. Margaret stood near the door. Evelyn Ward had arranged the documents across the table: prescription records, laboratory reports, Emily's childhood assessment, and her mother's letter. Thomas Reed had arrived from Silver Creek before dawn, along with several council members. For once, Robert Hale had nowhere to hide behind their silence. You wanted to speak to me, Emily said. Robert looked at her. Your mother knew your wolf would awaken differently. Emily placed both hands on the table. Then explain why you helped keep her asleep. Robert closed his eyes briefly. Because I was afraid. Of me. Of what your bloodline could mean. Hey. Restless murmur moved through the room. Robert continued. Your mother descended from an old Luna line. Women in that family sometimes developed their wolf later than others, but when they did, their mate bonds were unusually strong. Your mother believed you carried the same trait. Emily glanced toward Alexander. That was why she wrote the warning. Yes. And you ignored it. Robert's shoulders lowered. After she died, Dr. Grant convinced the council that suppressing your awakening would protect Silver Creek from royal attention. He said powerful packs might compete for control of you if your lineage became known. So you protected me by telling everyone I was defective? Emily asked. Robert flinched. At first, the medicine was supposed to be temporary. 2 years is not temporary. Silence answered her. Emily looked around the table. Who approved the false diagnosis? No one moved. Then Thomas Reed slowly raised his hand. I signed the council authorization. Pain crossed his face. I believed Grant when he said the lie would keep you safe. Emily felt something inside her become very still. You let me believe it too. Thomas lowered his eyes. Yes. You watched Daniel leave. You watched people treat me like I had no future. Yes. His voice broke. And I am sorry. Emily had imagined moments like this during lonely nights, imagined people finally admitting they had been wrong. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt tired. Alexander remained silent beside her. He did not rescue her from the decision. He had promised that judgment would be hers. Emily turned to Robert. What happened last night? Who sent the suppressant to Blackwood? Robert's face tightened. Dr. Grant. He contacted me after you signed the marriage agreement. He was terrified the royal physicians would discover the records had been altered. Did you help him? No. That is why I left Silver Creek. I was trying to reach Blackwood before he could interfere. Margaret placed a phone on the table. Security records support that. Robert contacted the Royal Gate twice during his drive. Emily looked toward Evelyn. And Dr. Grant? Located this morning. He has agreed to cooperate with an independent investigation. Emily drew a slow breath. No revenge rose inside her. Only certainty. Then here is my decision. Robert Hale and Thomas Reed are removed from any position involving medical or welfare decisions until the investigation is complete. Every medical record affected by Dr. Grant will be independently reviewed. Every Omega in Silver Creek will have the right to a second opinion outside the pack. She looked around the table. And nobody will ever again be declared less valuable because of fertility, rank, or the timing of their wolf. No one challenged her. Alexander's voice finally entered the silence. Blackwood will enforce those reforms. Emily turned toward him. He did not stand in front of her. He stood beside her. Thomas slowly rose from his chair and lowered his head. One by one, the Silver Creek council members followed. Not to Alexander. To Emily. The girl they had once considered the cheapest person to lose now held their future in her hands, and she had chosen justice without cruelty. Then the warmth beneath Emily's ribs surged. She gasped softly. Alexander turned toward her. Across the inside of her wrist, the silver crescent returned, brighter than before. Somewhere deep within her, something long silenced finally stirred awake, and this time, Emily heard it clearly. 3 months later, Emily stood on the western balcony of Blackwood Castle and listened to wolves calling across the snow-covered mountains. Once, those distant voices would have reminded her of everything she lacked. Now something inside her answered with a quiet warmth that no medicine could silence. Her wolf had not fully emerged yet, but she was there, patient, awake. Emily rested her hands on the stone railing and looked toward the valley below. Winter lights glowed along the roads, and trucks carrying Blackwood supplies were leaving for Silver Creek before another storm arrived. The investigation had changed more than Emily expected. Dr. Grant had lost his authority to practice, while an independent board reviewed every patient he had treated. Robert Hale and Thomas Reed had resigned from their council positions. More importantly, Silver Creek had adopted new medical protections, including outside reviews for serious diagnoses and strict limits on who could authorize suppressants. Mrs. Bennet had written that people were finally asking questions they should have asked years ago. Emily heard footsteps behind her. She knew who it was before he spoke. You are going to freeze out here. Alexander approached carrying her coat. He stopped behind her rather than placing it around her shoulders without permission. Emily smiled and took it from him. Some habits, she had learned, revealed more about a person than grand promises ever could. Margaret says the royal healer has my final results. Alexander leaned against the railing beside her. She does. Emily studied his face. And you already know. Yes. You are terrible at pretending you do not. I have been told that. She laughed softly, then looked back toward the mountains. The fear came anyway. It was quieter than before, but still familiar. Alexander, if the original diagnosis somehow turns out to be true, what happens? He did not answer immediately. Emily appreciated that too. He never rushed important words. Nothing happens. She turned toward him. The succession council needs an heir. The kingdom needs honest leadership. Those are not the same thing. You know what I mean. I do. Alexander's gray eyes held hers. And my answer remains the same. You were not chosen because of what your body might someday provide. You are my wife because you chose to stand beside me, and I am your husband only for as long as I deserve the same choice from you. Emily felt the old label inside her finally lose its weight. For 2 years, one word had followed her through every room. It had ended an engagement, changed friendships, and taught her to measure herself by an absence. Now she understood that the cruelest part had never been whether the diagnosis was true. It was that people had convinced her the answer determined her worth. The balcony door opened. Margaret stepped outside holding a folder. The independent medical review is complete. Emily accepted it, but did not open it immediately. Tell me. Margaret smiled. There is no medical evidence supporting Dr. Grant's diagnosis. Your hormone levels are recovering normally, and the suppressant is continuing to leave your system. The physicians cannot promise what your future will look like, but they found no reason to use the word that was placed in your record. Emily closed her eyes. The relief was not explosive. It arrived gently, like sunlight warming a room after a long winter. When she opened her eyes again, Alexander was watching her, but he did not celebrate for her. He simply waited. My mother was right, Emily whispered. About your wolf? About not letting them silence her. As if summoned by the words, warmth spread beneath Emily's ribs. The silver crescent appeared on her wrist, bright beneath the moonlight. From somewhere in the forest, a wolf called. Another answered. Emily felt the presence within her rise, stronger than ever before, and a clear voice seemed to settle inside her heart. Home. Alexander looked toward the mountains, then back at her. Emily slipped her hand into his. This time there was no fear in the gesture. Below them, Blackwood's lights stretched across the valley, while far beyond the mountains Silver Creek began learning a lesson Emily had paid dearly to understand. No rank, diagnosis, counsel, or tradition could decide the value of a life. The moon had never called her worthless. It had never called her broken. Those names had belonged only to people who could not see her clearly. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. Emily looked up at the winter sky and smiled. For the first time, she did not feel like the woman a desperate pack had sent away. She felt like the woman who had finally come home.